Hello, hello.
Yo, Jason.
How are you?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
Doing okay. Yeah.
Hanging in
So
there?
it's been a it's been a 24 hours, but all good. A little wet,
Uh,
but all
give
good.
give me the rundown. What's happening? Where are you and what's happening?
So in Santa Barbara, we're technically in Carpinteria on the north end near Montecito, and not to date this recording, but we just had a big storm blow through on January 9th, which is 5 years to the day of the massive and horrible mudslide event we had where we lost a lot of people lost property and some lives were lost. So I think we're all as a community dealing with a little PTSD. I can speak for my house at least. And when that storm hit last night, people were evacuated and streets were flooding and your head starts racing, and there was a lot of do we do this or that or whatever, but we stayed and did fine. And I've talked to some friends who had some damage, but all in all, I think um, tragedy missed, which is
Good.
good news. We are living in crazy times. It seems it's always something, isn't it?
It is. I saw that manhole covers were being blown out from the streets in Montecito. And so just thinking like that you could be walking through a puddle and fall into a sewer is a crazy thought in Montecito. Maybe if you were on vacation in a third world country, but crazy.
It's right out of a Charlie Chaplin film. Get washed out to sea.
Totally.
Yeah, but great effort by the first responders here. I just went for a
Yeah.
little mountain bike ride, and they're in and moving debris, moving trees that fell, and keeping those creeks clear. We're just, the watershed here is such a huge part of the system. Every little point break that surfers think of has some form of creek that kind of flows through there at some point, and that's what makes the area special. But when it rains really hard, like it did, and for those who have followed it, when we've had burn scars and there's lack of vegetation up on the hill, that water just comes charging down. It reminds me of when I was a kid and you do the old Universal Studios tour, and the tram would come around the corner, and they go, and now it's the flash flood, and it was like an
Yeah.
A-team set. It feels a little like that. You walk out to these creeks and you just see these torrents of water. If anybody's following Instagram, there's a lot of stuff being posted. So it's a little wild, but the world cycled through this many a time. We've just decided to put ourselves in the way, and that's for us to deal with.
That's a good point. Were you in town for that big swell event last week, at the end of last week?
Yeah, I shot a little bit with my nephews. We're working on a small project. Um, that's the biggest I've ever seen Santa Barbara in my life. Kind of, close out sections from point to, end of a cove. And I didn't get down to Rincon, but I saw some photos of crazy waves. A couple of friends of ours paddled out, but um, my nephew Parker was looking at it. He said it looks surfable, and then it'll be white water just to the horizon. So it was, as anyone who saw it, it was wild, and the imagery of Sandspit's pretty crazy. I looked for a spot. I wanted to paddle out, and it was kind of messy. I just didn't have it in me.
Yeah.
So.
I was wondering if it was surfable. I mean, even Rencon, which I never have seen Rencon not surfable. And
Yeah.
the couple of images that I saw were still shots that made it look doable, but I wasn't on the beach. And so I wasn't able to fully assess whether or not you could even make the paddle out or what.
Yeah, I think it was dodging the unsurmountable amount of water that was pushing through
Yeah.
every now and then it would settle. It was lowly. I looked at some of the lesser known spots near us that can get really good on a west swell, and in between the lulls it looked super fun. It didn't even look that intimidating, but then it would just
Yeah.
like wall out, and it was interesting the way the energy really pushed. Like if you look at images of Sandspit or the video, it's really sweeping wide, and I think that storm was so close, the energy just kind of, it didn't bend in like we're used to. It was a lot of, I guess, maxing out for what these points can handle. And all the sand is gone. It's going to be really interesting to see the way it comes back and how things are going to change and new spots may pop up, but we'll see.
Yeah, that'd
Yeah.
be interesting. Well, let's talk about surf films.
Yeah.
um, Congratulations on all of your success since I last saw you.
I know we should have started with it's good to see you. That interview we did was how many years ago now? Going on 10, maybe almost,
I
probably
want to
eight or
say it was,
nine.
yeah, I want to say it was 2014. So that would be 8.5 probably, because it wasn't at the beginning of the year. Do you remember by any chance where we recorded?
Tyler Hadzikian's old surf shop.
Yes. How crazy is
And
that?
and as you poignantly put it, we did it at a time where you had to explain to me what a podcast was. So the world's
That has
changed in a few
you weren't
ways.
the you weren't the only person. I honestly, the vast majority of people I interviewed back then, yeah, had no clue.
It was
So
new
yeah, but
beginnings.
it was for sure. And I'm glad to have had the foresight to get in early, because I was developing the reps when and like not I was not very good at it when nobody was listening. And so I was able to develop the muscle so that when people were listening, then I was comfortable with it, you know.
Yeah, you got a little more rhythm going. Well, congrats, and congrats for sticking with it. It's wonderful to see when someone connects with something and puts something out there that people respond to. And I know it takes work, so it's good on you guys for staying after it.
Thanks.
It's exciting, and thanks again for having me. But yeah, surf films. That was Bella Vita, so that was my third film at the time.
Yeah. And
And
I don't know if you remember this, but we actually hosted a screening of it in Long Beach. And Chris Del Moro came down for the screening. And we sold out the place actually. And it was again very early into my podcasting game. And it was the first time we tried to do a community event. And it was so well received. And I tried to do one or two others after that, but the film makers were not as well organized as you were. I think you made the process like plug and play for anybody around the world, I think, who wanted to do it. So it was really easy for me to do it, to get the theater to do their portion of it, to advertise it, to have all the assets to advertise it. All of that made it seamless.
It's work. And the brands that put out movies have a marketing team, or at least they used to, and the independents have to do that work or have a small team of people who can jump in or partner. There's some great curated now screening tours and whatnot. It's interesting you bring that up, because I got an email the other day. It's actually the 20-year anniversary of Single Fin Yellow, my first film, and there was some interest in a 20-year anniversary tour, which sounds great, but like my brain starts thinking of all the things you just mentioned, and I don't have the bandwidth for that. And
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone's listening who's into that sort of thing. Feel free to hit me up. We could talk about it. But I do think as surfers, we are such a wonderful community. It was something I really realized on this new project, Chasing Waves. And it's a global community of support. And I do think the kind of getting around the campfire, where it all began, can still live in putting movies up, putting music up, having art shows. I mean, I think, and we're all kind of coming out of this pandemic with a hangover, but this idea of getting people together is so important, and I think in doing it in ways that aren't always surf contests, but just keeping that community spirit alive. And that's what I love about movies. And it's too bad it's become a little tricky on a financial end for independents to do that. The days of Bruce Brown barnstorming his movies are beautiful, and some of us were able to do it to a degree, but it's getting tricky. And my hat's off to anyone who tries, and I'm also welcome to answer questions and whatnot if you need, because it's as you mentioned, there's just a lot to it.
Yeah. Let's come back to that exact conversation of that transition of the way that media is digested. But let's start with what's your background, or how did you get into filmmaking, essentially?
Film was long before surf. Um, I grew up in Southern California, and I actually grew up in Pasadena, which as a kid I was embarrassed to share with surfers. But then I realized, well, Bob Simmons is from Pasadena, and so's Van Halen, so fuck off. But it was a bit of a landlocked experience, and I was always into creative things really young. And luckily, my cousin, who's a bit older, is now a working Hollywood cinematographer. At the time, I was about 5 years old. He was already making little movies. And I got to walk in on him shooting a stop motion thing on Super 8 film. And I remember they lived in Palos Verdes. We were driving back, on the freeway through downtown LA. And I told my parents, I'm going to make movies for a living. It was just like lightning. Which now that I'm a parent is so interesting because I see that in my kids with a few things. My daughter being very into music already at age 7. And I don't know if certain people just gravitate to things early or how that works. But for me, it was film, and it's always been film to a fault. There's not much else I can do. And then I always loved the ocean and surfing, and ended up studying film at Loyola Marymount, where we were on the ocean. And I really, day to day got to spend my time in the water, attempting to be a good shortboarder at El Porto, which is a very difficult feat, and got my clock clean more than a few times, and realized, oh, I can kind of combine these interests. And my one senior film, I adapted a short story by Chris Aarons from a book called Good Things Love Water. And I happened, ironically enough, to just be watching it today because I'm digitizing a bunch of old videotapes. And it's not a great cinematic piece of work. It's a student film for sure, but it was kind of my first experience in connecting surfing and a love for surf culture with filmmaking. And at the time I was obsessed with John Milius's Big Wednesday, and I grew up watching, of course, The Endless Summer. But I wanted kind of that Big Wednesday experience where it was about these characters in surf culture, more than being a surf movie. And it's funny when I look at it now, I think I knew so little about surfing and the history of surfing from where I am now that
Yeah.
I would have done a lot of things differently to make it better. But that was the beginning. And out of school, I kind of did the Hollywood route and worked for a production company, and was in the mailroom, and then kept getting moved up. And it was an office job, and they wanted me to continue and rise up, and I really missed making movies. Had some friends from college who we were writing, and this was the era of Tarantino, putting Reservoir Dogs in a film fest. And so there was sort of this idea of, oh, if you do an indie thing and you get in festivals, you can have a career. And so I quit my job, and we kind of went all in on writing this thing. And my friend had some money, and in the last hour, he got cold feet and kind of pulled the plug on the whole thing. And I was sort of left like, oh, okay, I quit my job, and what do I do now? And I think in the end, it was a bit of a gift, because my world, it's sort of, we traveled as a family. I was really lucky that way. My parents were good about taking us places. And so I knew my bubble was bigger than my bubble. But growing up in LA and then going to school in LA, I really did grow up in a bubble. Summers were in Newport or San Clemente, and my sister and her husband started migrating up to Santa Barbara. And so that was my world. And I kind of, took a step back and said, I'm going to, I call it now my walkabout phase. I went on walkabout, and I started going to Hawaii a lot and spending time in Mexico and just traveling as much as I could with a surfboard, as the excuse. And at the time I was doing a little painting, and I could do a painting for someone and trade them for a few weeks on their couch or whatever it took. And so that was sort of I think the inroad to my interest in seeing the world, and then beginning to think of, wow, it'd be fun to share these experiences with people. And of course, I ran out of money, probably more realistically, put too much money on a credit card and had my parents yell at me that I had to find a real job. And lucky enough, some people I knew through the South Bay had started Blue Torch Television, which, for those who remember, was one of the first daily action sports TV shows. Actually built as a tech company with a back end about a set box top chip where you could watch the TV series, pause it on Slater, and buy his board shorts, which now is kind of where we're at, right? But it was so ahead of its time. And they had the wherewithal to, like, here we're doing this very forward thinking tech integration. Who's going to be interested in that? It's going to be younger people. What are they interested in? Action sports. Who's going to be interested in making that content? Young people who do it. So it was very smart. I give them a lot of credit. Matt Jacobson, CJ Oliveris was one of the point people. CJ ended up starting Fuel TV. And it was there I met Mark Jeremias, who ended up being one of my great collaborators. And Mark and I really hit it off, and he saw my love for surfing and longboarding, and allowed me to go produce, pretty quickly, segments about surfing. One of which also I just found on tape this morning, which was the longboard tube riding contest down in Puerto Escondido they used to do. And that was one of my first trips. I went down there with a couple film, support film crew people, some Super 8 film, and we covered it, over the course of the week. And for me, it was huge, because not only was I learning while getting paid, but I was meeting Bonga Perkins and Bo Young and David Kineshita, people who ended up being influential in my future projects. Devin Howard eventually on a trip, Joel Tudor, and so it got me realizing, wow, I love both these things. There is a synergy. For anyone who's worked in television, it's a grind. You're just, especially that show. So we were doing 5 shows a week.
Wow.
They were outside producers, so it was a little bit of packaging stuff being made. Cheers to everybody out there who worked on Blue Torch. And we would bring it in, and then we'd produce some stuff ourselves. And then you'd build the show. And it's another great relationship of mine. Carl Kramer was an editor I worked with a lot, and Kramer's gone on to cut all my movies and was our lead editor on Chasing Waves, the new Disney Plus series. So it was a really neat time. And as the technology bubble was bursting and the show was kind of suffering, people started running. I kind of went down with the ship, and then at the end saw a point of, like, okay, I love this, but I grew up wanting to make movies, and I'm not making movies. I'm kind of on this treadmill. And that's when I bailed, and I had saved enough money that I could go make Single Fin Yellow. Not without some hurdles. I ended up raising some money and maxing a credit card to finish it. But that was sort of, the journey of combining it all together. And looking back, it makes sense. At the time, it all seemed ridiculous. And and Single Fin was really just out of the want of making a movie. And, there's that old saying, if you're going to make a movie, do something So somebody said that in film school. It stuck in my head. And I was dumb enough to think if I did a really good surf movie, that enough people in Hollywood surf or like surfing, that would then get me back into, the next big Jean-Claude Van Damme movie or whatever it would have been. But it was an amazing time. It took a while. And I think it was 3 or 4 years later, 20 years this summer, we did our first screenings. And a lot of credit to Mark Jeremias, his brother Stephen Jeremias, in everything you brought up about screening. They were already doing a little bit with snow films and snowboarding and some skate stuff. And they plugged Single Fin and me sort of into that system of how you promote. We would print flyers. I still have some, and give them to kids to pass out at the parking lot at Blackie's or Malibu. And it was building that culture and community, and it was very hands-on because we didn't have Instagram or Twitter, and we weren't even really doing email campaigns. So it was putting posters up at the surf shop and the coffee shop, and and it was fun. And it worked because people loved getting together, I think, whether or not they liked the movie. I think just giving people an excuse to go out and kind of enjoy something as a community was cool.
What was the concept for Single Fin Yellow?
So that was based on an early idea I'd had in film school about following one object. It's something I've always been interested in, and had kind of drafted a couple more Hollywood versions. And Violet, Blue Torch. I'm trying to think of what I was watching, but surf movies were going through a little bit of a change where you had the video all action, genre. And I think, at least for me, there was a bit of a limit on that. And then you started seeing the woodshed stuff, and Scott Sones made a skate film that was great. And, Chris and Emmett, and of course, Jack did Thicker Than Water. And I think September Sessions had been finished by then. And I remember, I probably don't give it enough credit, like what an influence those projects had, because it for the first time I saw surfing in a way that it evoked emotion. There was something deeper going on there that I was feeling, that I got out of Big Wednesday, out of that type of project. And I definitely, it's kind of, I think in my career, it's a little bit to take all these things and put it in a blender and see what comes out. And longboarding didn't have much of anything, not to discredit. I think Thomas had made The Ceiling, which people absolutely love, and a lot of respect for that, but a very different style of project. I wanted to do something that felt like it had a story, beginning, middle, and end, and kind of some character depth. And that was the goal, and I'm lucky that people enjoyed it, because it allowed me to go do another one.
Do you remember the film Shelter?
Yeah.
There was a segment of that where everybody's riding a green single fin kind of.
I think that's in Thicker Than Water, actually.
Oh, is it really?
I'm sure Chris will text me later and remind me. Yeah, but
okay.
Yeah, the green board, which is out of the Malloy head. Chris has been a friend for a while, and he deserves a lot of credit for all that cool stuff comes out of his brain. The guy's a savant, and I'm honored to get to have worked with him through the years. So yeah, the green board. I mean, right? That's a good 5-minute sequence, and I absolutely, I'm sure that had an effect on me. I mean, I can't say I remember watching that film and then going, "Oh, I got to go make my own."
No.
But there's no way that wouldn't have left an impression,
But as the viewer, I remember that standing out as, because I love all these surfers individually, and I've seen all of them surfing in a dozen different films on their shapers surfboards. And so it was a total kind of new experience for me to see them all try to ride the same exact board,
Yeah.
So and I wanted to see more of it. So it was a logical.
And a board that was a little tricky too, right? So it's,
totally.
you're making people work, which is entertaining. I mean, the scene in that film that stands out to me is Kelly working on the guitar. And I think they shot that the day before maybe one of the big contests. And there's just this soulfulness to the experience, and this intimacy, and how it plays against him surfing. And I remember just loving that. I would watch that again and again, going, gosh, if I can make something that evokes this same kind of emotion, I call it the goosebump factor. It's like, that's always my goal, to get some, whether it's a laugh or a rise out of people. I feel if you're getting that goosebump factor, I feel that I and my team are doing our jobs right,
Totally. I want to ask you about One California Day, because I watched that film over and over again when it came out. How did you pick the cast of characters? Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, that was fun. That was I mentioned Mark and Stefan, and Stefan's made fun of me. I've been hit in the head a lot of times, so I tend to forget things. I also enjoy happy hour. That might have something to do with it. But Stefan was saying he was very much involved in these conversations, and I honestly don't remember. But I remember we were planning the screenings of Single Fin and talking a little bit about what's next. And there was a moment where Steph and I were talking about doing something with Hobie Alter that I was really excited about. And so I was already thinking about kind of this tradition of surfing in California, and that project wasn't working. But at the same time, these books, kind of these day in the life photo books, I should know the name of them, but I think it was called Day in the Life New York, Day in the Life LA. And I don't know if it's Toshin, but somebody was sending out a group of photographers on a day to capture the city, and then building these great coffee table books. And they had one, and we were kind of looking through it. And I was like, wow, this is a really interesting concept. Like, can you do a movie this way? Like, what if we did that here? And looking back, Mark's been very poignant about it, because he's so creative and very tapped into surf culture, Mark Jeremias. At that point, the cameras were all looking at Indo and where can we go and where's the new wave, and nobody was running a bear flag on their on their Quicksilver gear or their Ruka gear or whatever. It just, people, we had moved on, which made sense. And so I think we kind of lucked into it, because it really just came out of this want of capturing this place. And to answer your question, to do that, we said, okay, how can we kind of show different parts of it? And different, when I say parts, not just locations, but ethos of surfing, right? So Joel Tudor being very different than maybe the Malloy crew, or Tyler Hatzikian against Joe Curran. And it just sort of started evolving that way. And there was people we felt like we had to work with, because it's just like, how do you not try to get Joe and Tom Curran in a movie about California? And at the same time, I think there was relationships. I was thinking about our chat on my ride, and how much of this, going back to that Blue Torch thing, I just love working with my friends. Since I was a kid, I like calling my friends over and grabbing a camera and doing something. And I think it's steered a lot of these projects too. You meet people and you want to work with them because you like hanging out with them, and you end up on these projects hanging out with them quite a bit. So if you don't get along, then it's painful. And so I think that was a lot of it too. So it was, who can we pick in that area that makes sense and represents, with Jed Knoll and Greg, you had this passing down, this deep love for surfing and building these board replicas. And it just was finding those pieces that sort of made sense to us, at least. Should Dayton Reynolds have had a big part in it? Yeah, probably. But it's kind of, you do it, and we were shooting film, so you couldn't just shoot everybody. It became very strategic. And on that, the original idea, we talked a lot about attempting to pick a swell and shoot it in one day.
Yeah.
And for Mark and I, Mark and I are both a little bit OCD, and we like to kind of control our imagery. And we just couldn't, especially back then, wrap our heads around finding enough filmmakers that we could entrust with shooting film.
Yeah.
And then even having the communication, again, that was whatever, 2006, 7, 8, I think we were shooting. It's just a different time. Now with everybody owning a Red and cell phones, you probably could orchestrate that. It might be a fun project, but for us, we kind of then embraced the idea of one day, and it is what it is. But thank you for watching. That one, I think, of all the films, has really left a impression, from what I hear, on surfers throughout the world, which is so meaningful, because you do them for people to enjoy. They're self-indulgent, but you do them for people to enjoy.
Of course. I want to go back a little bit. You were talking about saving up money to film and shoot single fin yellow.
Yeah.
What did it cost to make a film back in those days? And obviously the business model back then was to sell individual units of DVDs, which were $30 was the retail cost. So how much did you have to come up with to make a film? And then were those two projects successful?
Yeah. Single fin is probably mathematically my most successful, but part of that might be because I made it for the least amount. I think we were in the can and out, like up on a screen for around $85,000-$90,000. Um, I had self-financed and or put on credit a good half of that. And my sister, God bless her, who's older, one of my sisters has an MBA from UCLA that she stepped in and goes, okay, you need a business plan, you need investors, like you're doing this wrong. So
Yeah.
that halfway through the shoot, and again, I didn't pay myself. Like that covered
Right.
plane tickets, hotels, airfare, or excuse me, film stock, and then film processing, and then bar tabs and whatever else I could stoke out the guys with as we went along. And we reset. I have a business plan that I ended up using on the future films because she hit it out of the park. And I brought in investors, so we raised another $40,000+ Mark Jeremias in Build Worldwide kicked in a hair more to own kind of the distribution rights. And we made the movie. And you're right, like that was a beautiful time because you have this movie, then there's some distribution costs. On top of that, you're printing, your first run of DVDs, whatever that is, 5,000, say. So that's an investment. I couldn't tell you offhand. I want to guess $2 to $3 a DVD. So maybe you put in 10, 15,000 then, and then those sell to surf shops for $14, $15, and then the surf shop doubles it. That was sort of the math. And the screening tours, you put on the screening tours and you're hopefully, renting out theaters and stuff like that. Tends to be a losing proposition, but if you can get sponsors on board and, you get some free money coming in, that makes a big difference. So it made sense. And back then what was cool is the surf shops would just order. And then when Christmas came around, they would order a little more because he had just had so many, parents coming in and grabbing them. And it was just this neat thing that made sense. I mean, the business model has unit breakdown and go, here's our low end, here's our high end, here's when we did One California Day, we said, this is what Single Pinello did. This is what we think this will do. And that is now all gone. You just, I have a bunch of DVDs in a shed here in Santa Barbara that, it's you can hang them from the rearview mirror and keep pigeons away from your hood or something. But it was cool. It was cool to kind of have it in a way that was, you could break it down. It made sense. Obviously, if your film didn't work, then it's not to say everything's going to be a home run. But Mark and I always came to it with like, hey, let's make evergreen titles. Let's make things that feel like, let's put the energy in, spend the money on film, whatever that is, to build stuff that will last. I mean, it's why you call this company Build Worldwide. We really put a lot of thought and heart into, hopefully at the time, doing things that would stick around. So I'm really honored that they have. Now we're cycling through new iterations of where you find these things, and that's kind of a trip too. Like single fin, I didn't have the money to do, I don't think the technology was there to do an HD transfer because DVD wasn't an HD medium at that time. So I can't get it on iTunes. They won't accept it as a standard definition, which some people ask, like, why isn't it on iTunes? All your other movies are. So I'd have to go back to the neg, rescan it and all that, which is, it's laborious, and I didn't really set up the project to do that efficiently. And I've taken to the Instagram feed, like, do you guys think we should try to do this? And everyone's like, no, take the money and do something new or whatever. So, but you get tripped up, and so you get into this game of trying to future proof your work.
Totally.
Even Bella Vita was kind of, we shot mostly 35, but then some 2K digital. And now it's 4K for Chasing Waves, and the acquisition's probably going to change to 6K in another 5 years. So you're always, it's a bit of a hamster wheel.
When I was asking about how'd you pick the characters for One California Day, the reason I asked is because that's like a through line, I think, through all your work is the characters are very, very interesting. And that continues through with Chasing Waves.
Mm,
And so you said, should we have had more Dane Reynolds? And it's like, Dane it almost prefers to not be a character. Like Dane lets his surfing do the talking, and other people showcase that greatly. And I think like in the modern surf world, there's actually not enough characters.
mm,
Like in the way that it's displayed through a lot of the WSL and other people's work, they're really focusing on the surfing and they're really not trying to develop character.
yeah.
And so all of your projects are a really breath of fresh air. And it almost, the surfing still does matter. You have to have good surfing. It absolutely helps to, if Joe Curran can surf well and Tom, but they're such interesting, colorful characters as well. And you focus on that. Your films always focus on that more than anything, is what it feels like to me.
Well, thank you. And
Yeah,
it probably on a certain level comes from being a frustrated narrative, movie maker,
yeah, yeah.
and loving great stories and great movies. And how do I cheat that into this surf world I love, and kind of the hybrid of what it becomes. Because I think you're right, and I've had this conversation with other people off the record. That I think our professional surfing world is hurting, because as surfers we love to watch the active surfing. For the non-surfer, it's a little unrelatable, and so then all you have is the character. And if you don't care about the person you're watching, the disconnect happens very quickly. And so to get people to tune in and watch, a Heat, a Pipeline, it's a bit of a, it's a light show, right? It's amazing, it's impressive, and people who surf or don't surf, because a lot of us don't surf pipe, can get that, and you get the danger and the drama. But for the average spot, I think, we're missing the mark by not finding a way to get to know those people better. And there's another series on another platform, platform I absolutely love. And I don't know if that series hit the mark either for me. It was interesting because it came out as we were finishing ours, Chasing Waves, and I was super intimidated because they had a lot more access than we had, which is something we can talk about, because that was very different on this series than my movies in the past, where I was working with my best friends in a backpack, and this new project was bigger crews and a very different approach. But at the same time, it's we need to share who these people are beyond, I think, their interest in the technicalities of surfing.
Yeah.
And I guess part of that is choosing people with interesting stories, and I credit on Chasing Waves a great team of people who helped me in that, and I learned a lot actually about it. And I think if we're lucky enough to do a season 2, we collectively learn some lessons, that which episodes maybe feel stronger and why.
Yeah.
And it's more often than not because of story and, what people are the who, what, why, who do
Yeah.
we care about? What are the stakes, and what are they trying to accomplish?
Well, like Kanoa Igarashi, I've known since he was young, and I found him more interesting through your lens
Mm,
than I have found him in my own personal interactions
wow.
with him, or certainly more so than what the WSL has portrayed. Um, and I was like, man, he's super smart. He's like shockingly, I don't know if humble's the right word, but like grounded in terms
Yeah.
of his connection to his family, and this kind of be him needing to honor them, or just wanting to
Mm.
honor them and all the hard work that they've done to help him get to where he is. And was very articulate in the way that he communicated all of it. I was like, man, I loved Kanoa more after watching this.
Well, that's cool. Thank you. And he's such a tremendous surfer, and he's I feel for him, because there's that news clip of what he's 4 or 5 years old, and he's getting interviewed, and it's the great clip. We've all seen it, but you can't not run it, because he's like, I'm going to be world champ, or whatever he says. And but to be have the lens on you at that level for that long, and then to keep bringing it, really
Yeah.
is it's impressive and it's not easy,
Yeah.
you know. I've been on that side. I've seen the other side with my nephews growing up, you know, and becoming pro surfers and being Connor and Parker Coffin and what they go through. And Kanoa really, you know, he brings a focus that's just undeniable. And I think that's very him, but I also think that's very Japanese. You know, I think he gets a lot of that from that Japanese heritage. And you know, I do believe going into this project, I kind of had this thesis of, okay, we're going to look at Japanese surf culture. The pitch was very, the fulcrum was the Olympics. You know, how are the Olympics going to change surf culture in Japan? This was before we knew the pandemic would shut doors, but we kind of thought we'd be there before and after and shoot and get to know people and get to know athletes and then kind of see the back end of it. And I really thought, oh, well, Japanese families probably frown on surfing. You know, it's this vagabond sport that we've talked about in other media projects in other places. And yet, you know, now it's in the Olympics, it's legitimate. And what I found in doing the series and talking to people, I think I'm behind. I think that's already been realized in Japan. And I say that with, you know, again, from my outside lens looking in, but we have things that, you know, can be broken down. Wave pools, you can have a coach, you can shoot a session in slow motion and have someone break it down. The Japanese for years, you know, the first time I ever saw a bottom turn broken down in a surf mag was a Japanese surf mag, you know, or how to do the perfect cutback. There's a fascination with style and hand placement and all these details that I don't think other, you know, and this is a big generalization, but other surf communities have necessarily looked at until recent times. And so because it's becoming more of a part of surfing, that makes it makes more sense to a, you know, a Japanese parent who's like, oh, you want to do what? You want to be a surfer? Now they can look at it and go, oh wow, okay, well, yes, it's an Olympic sport, it's a real thing, you can make money. Kanoa
Yeah.
obviously is showing that. And yet there's also this other finite level of it. You can break it down, you can have a coach, you can go to a wave pool and do reps, like all these things. And because of that, I think the talent that's going to come up out of there, I think people are going to be blown away. I really just, you can kind of feel this energy that reminds me of the early days of the Brazilian, you know, push and kind of how everybody's all of a sudden saying, wow, everybody good's Brazilian. I really do think you could see that happen with a crew of Japanese men and women.
Yeah. Mahina Maeda, I think in her storyline, probably in episode 1, talks about that. She talks about, and she grew up in Hawaii, but her parents are Japanese. And so she talks about American kids would get rewarded from their parents or praised from their parents regardless on their performance in whatever the sport was. If the kids sucked at the sport, if they lose, they still get pat on the back and say, you're wonderful. She said, my life was the exact opposite. My parents wouldn't give me validation even if I won. They would still criticize my performance even when I was winning. And so I think that was more representative of Japanese culture, you know, which is very interesting.
It's intense, you know, and I knew some of my best friends growing up had parents who either still lived in whether it was Japan, a few Chinese friends, and how intense the expectations were on them scholastically, through sport, whatever it was such a different thing than what I was going through. You know,
Totally.
my parents were like, oh yeah, you gotta have good grades, but you know, also love what you're doing and chase film. And it was just, it was fascinating to me. And you know, you get to know these stories firsthand. I'm getting to interview these people and I'm hearing things that actually really moved me. You know, I ended up calling a few of my friends that I grew up with because I didn't realize how hard, as these characters share, and as you'll see if you watch this show, they found growing up multicultural was, and sort of the identity of fitting in. And, I went back and called some of the friends I grew up with. I said, man, I'm sorry. Like, were you going through that? And almost 100% of resounding, yeah, but it's fine. I'm fine. I was like, God, dude, I'm sorry. I had no idea. So I really think this series, if you have any interest in surfing or documentary filmmaking, there's something there. But even more so, this kind of idea of multicultural identity and performance and parental expectations, I feel it can relate to a lot of people beyond just the average surfer. And I'm proud of that. I'm really proud of the team. There was a lot of great people who worked on this thing, so I only
Well,
get a little bit of the credit.
how did the project come to you, or was it your concept that you pitched?
Yeah, how life works. It was in the middle of the pandemic. We were sort of stuck at home, and at this moment in my life, I had sort of sworn I wouldn't do anything surfing, and I was working on my writing, and kind of going back to that kid who came out of college and was going to go make indie films, and had a script that we were working on getting financed. And the phone rings, and it was a very good, very old friend of mine in Christopher Cowan. And just to frame it, Chris's mom and my mom were buddies. So literally in diapers, they had us playing together. And he's gone on to produce some wonderful stuff, a lot of stuff for CNN. And, I think the text message said, hey, can you get on a call? Disney's interested in doing surfing. So I called him up, and I remember sitting on my then balcony and looking out the ocean. And he said, look, I've been pitching some ideas. They're really interested in content about Japanese culture, and surfing came up. Your name came up. They love One California Day. The few people here have seen it. They love Single Fin Yellow. Would you be up for it? And my brain kind of started spinning because it was against everything I told myself I was going to be doing at the time. And yet it was like, wow, okay, well, here's a really good old friend I've always wanted to work with. I grew up as a Southern California kid in love with Disney, and not
Totally.
only the parks, but the culture. And I wanted to work at Imagineering at one point and design the rides. Um, and then this idea of, wow, could I get to do surfing not out of a backpack, but with the support where we can, have high speed cameras and fancy drones. And, my brain starts thinking visually of all the toys. And so I said yes. And we then had to flush it out. Chris and I worked together. Chris really carried the ball on kind of putting together a concept that worked for them, for Disney. And then Disney, we this was all remote because it was pandemic. We did a bunch of Zoom interviews and started flushing out the casting, and kind of, I joke it's a little bit of Bella Vita, One California Day, and Loopers in a blender. It's sort of, and so we kind of took a similar approach of like, who are different characters who represent different parts of Japanese surf culture and different regions. And I spent a lot of time reaching out to friends, through the years, who are either Japanese or have done media on my projects, who are from Japan, and said, who do I need to talk to? Who should be in this? Because I really felt the pressure of a surf community that supported me. I mean, if not for the Japanese with the DVD sales on Single Fin Yellow and One Cover Day, I wouldn't get to keep making surf movies. And so I felt that pressure of, I want to do something that will make them proud. And on these things, you're always going to miss somebody, and you're always going to have the person you want but can't get, or whatever it is. And that certainly happened, but we did our best to do our homework and get some core key people that can tell this story, or at least shed a little bit of light into what it is to be from Japan or have Japanese heritage and be in the pro surfing world. And so
It
that's
seems
our field.
seems like there's more space to tell the story over the course of 8 episodes. It's eight, right?
It's eight, yeah.
Yeah, eight
So
episodes
it's
rather than a 90-minute film.
yeah. There is a freedom. There's also an intimidation. You're essentially, it's 6+ hours of content, so it's kind of
Yeah.
making 3 feature films. And there's there's a schedule, so it's a bit of a race to the finish, and there's always the not the fear, but you can fall back on, oh, okay, well, we'll just let that go. And I did my best to kind of keep the same level of expectation that I would put if I was doing a movie that I hoped around in 20, 30 years, that this thing could kind of live on that same plateau of at least visual quality and storytelling. And and then life throws you curveballs. Japan closed its doors because of the pandemic. So my core team that was going to fly in and shoot this thing, we literally couldn't go to Japan. And then you start scratching your head, well, how are we even going to do this? And frankly, a lot of it was done like this, where we had teams embedded in Japan, in Australia, teams following Connor O'Leary once he got to Europe, and I would sit on a laptop and look at frames, and Chris Cowan would sit, and co-executive producer Sophie Cruz would sit, and it got insane. There was days where we had a shoot in Australia, a shoot in Japan, and a shoot in California. And so you're literally up 24 hours a day. We would kind of platoon it on a certain level. And I have a bottle of tequila back there for when it really got rough, and you just kind of try to keep it going. But we had great teams, and we had the liberty of time. The schedule was long, so as sequences got shot, I could give notes, I could look at it, kind of say like, hey, you guys are missing this, or Chris would say, wow, we really should have more of this, for always thinking about the editing, and what we would need to tell the story. And I think that helped us a lot, because you shape it as you go, and you learn as a team.
Yeah.
So I watch it, and I get a little emotional, in the sense that I can't believe we pulled it off on a certain level. I guess in a way that I watch it, and it feels like something I would have gone and shot. And that's always exciting to me, because it's tough to watch something and feel like, oh gosh. And there's moments that you know I worry a little about, but that's also life. When you don't have all the access, it's hard to do stuff sometimes.
Um, can you explain what the structure of the storyline is? You mentioned earlier that the fulcrum was the Olympics, but
Yeah,
that happens pretty early in the series.
yeah, because Japan shut its doors and we couldn't go and sort of approach it the way we wanted to, we opted to move the Olympic story up. And so, as a series, you get to know Team Japan a little bit, and the qualification process to a degree, because there were some interesting stories there, and Mahina's story sort of fit in there, where she was going head to head with Shino, a girl from Japan. And so we wanted to get into that, but we also, we knew there was other stuff. Yuma being the one really interesting thing for me. He's kind of a longboard free surfer, and he packs up a van and does a road trip through Japan, and sort of, it's very of my other films, learns a bit about his history and the surf culture in Japan. And so we get to go on a bit of a road trip through him. So we wanted to intercut these different things, and it seemed to make sense to sort of address the Olympics and what happened, and then spend a little more time on the back end of kind of, after that event, how did that change these characters' lives, life in Japan. And there was also an interest, as the show developed, to keep it on a more worldwide perspective, and bring in voices, and not be solely in Japan and only in Japan. And so that was tricky. It was like, okay, well, how do we connect the dots here? But you get a bit of history. I think you get a bit of insight into how things have evolved there, and how we got to the Olympics, and quite a bit about Fernando and his path to get surfing in the Olympics. Which, again, it's a passionate person. I think when people talk about their passions, there's usually some meat on the bone there, and I really enjoy seeing what he went through to get surfing into the Olympics. Whether or not you agree or disagree with it, I think there's something to commend him on never giving up on his personal dream. which we touch on a little bit. And, at the end of the series, I think leave the door open for what's going to happen next in Olympics in France, which people are saying could be Chopu for the surfing event.
Yeah. Yeah. Just to fill in the names of who you're talking about with
Yeah,
broadening
sorry.
the conversation, Gerlach is in it. Brisick is a talking kind of building context for
Yeah.
how Japan fits into the surf world. I'm curious if you could elaborate a little bit on how surfing found its way into Japan and what were kind of the origin stories of surfing in Japan.
Yeah, it's not unlike, I guess, other ocean related places. There is, from the Edo period, so we're talking 200 years ago, writings about people riding waves. They had these itako boards, which were floorboards and boats that were removable. And as the story goes, the fishermen would come in and the kids would grab these boards and slide on waves. And so that is documented, as early as I think the 1700s. But surfing, not unlike in Bella Vita, really seems to have found its place in Japan through the U.S. military. So post World War II, you had active servicemen coming in, and they brought their boards. They're like, I'm going to this island. I'm getting transferred from Hawaii to Okinawa. I'm bringing this new longboard, and so we show a little bit of Bruce Brown's footage. He went, I think, in '64 or '3, and literally there's lifeguards throwing the surfers off, out of the water and pulling them in because they think it's so dangerous. So
Yeah.
it's relatively new, but as we touch on in the series, I think there is a fascination with Western culture and being cool, and I think for some people, including some of the characters who we interview, an interest in being a bit of a rebel, and that surfing obviously has always had a bit of that image, and that's what really caught on in the early days, and has obviously evolved quite a ways from
The film or the series does the most comprehensive job that I've seen of showcasing Japanese surf culture, because I've seen tidbits of it here and there, but the variety of stories that you tell, and even the juxtaposition of Shino's story with Mahina Maeda's story, because Mahina, who's from Hawaii and is taking the path of like training super hard, being very regimented about, she's got some talent and she's going to be very regimented to kind of leverage that to become a better talent. Her story's juxtaposition with Shino's, who they're vying for the same Olympic spot. And Shino is this young, preternatural talent who gets a lot of resource and opportunity thrown at her. Like, brands want to sponsor her. She's doing photo shoots all of the time. So that would be time that could also be dedicated towards training and surfing more frequently and whatever. So there's these two different paths that these girls are on. And I won't spoil who gets the Olympic berth in case anybody doesn't already know, but it's a very kind of interesting, the culture has, in one sense, for Mahina, almost demanded that she is not good enough and that she has to continually try harder. But the culture also wants to celebrate and make celebrity out of over here. And so seeing the way that those two things manifested was very, very interesting. So again, I hadn't known that detail. Like, I know they
that.
love Kanoa and he's a superstar on the level of almost like a boy band would be, in America. But I didn't know her story. And the guy traveling in the van, I also didn't know that story. So it was just a really rich telling of, again, comprehensive telling of the culture that I hadn't yet seen.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's I think we Chris and Cowan and I talked a lot from the earliest, points of beginning. How do we do a surf thing, but make it very much about the people? It's not a
Yeah.
surf movie at all, and I credit him for really pushing me on that. And I think what you're speaking to is just that ethos. And we had things that I've never benefited from, where we had 4 story producers plus a lead story producer,
Wow.
a co-executive producer who is very story driven, helping me and Chris oversee all these things. And then each story producer had an editor. So we had 4 edit bays up kind of rolling through. And once we made the decision that each episode would intercut stories, you can imagine you're on this schedule. So you're looking at the end, but you're like, oh, wait, how do we know what goes there? Because if something doesn't work, and so we
Yeah.
had what we would joke horse trading sessions where, oh, you have that one moment, like, let's move that to episode 4, and I'm going to move this. And it made it harder, but I'm very proud of it. It's something we wanted to do with One California Day. Like that long ago, I've been wanting to intercut storylines like that. And so it was more work, but I think it makes it more dynamic. And you kind of, as you mentioned, Yuma's in the van, you get to kind of come in and out of his trip and meet
Yeah.
these other people. And I would worry if one episode was just the van trip that you kind of just get lost in it. But it was this team. It was a great team of people who really can sit and dig into, finding how to share these things in a way that I truly hope are as meaningful to people who watch it as they have been to us. Because I know as a team, there's a moment where we called it chasing tears, because almost every interview someone would start crying, which I personally feel is a reflection on where we are as a world post-pandemic. I think everybody is just coming out of this stressful thing, and you start talking about your family or surfing, and it just would be this deluge of tears. But I think, the other part of that is we are really getting to the core of what drives these people and what's important to them. And, surfing is a beautiful thing. It's not easy to make a living these days in the surf industry.
No.
And you're looking at a microcosm of that. And so I think that is, I agree. I think it's really interesting. And, I feel for someone like Shino, who's pretty young. Like these are young athletes who are just getting
Yeah.
to know themselves. And, when I was that age, I think I was just going off to university, to keg parties and like just to be really a fool. And here they are having to, be on this world stage and under a true microscope. And then the social media being a part of that, we touch on Kanoa's experiences with social media, which has been talked about before, but I feel for him to kind of bring it and bring that professionalism that you mentioned while under the scrutiny, and that's the world we're in. I laughed yesterday. The family was ordering pizza, and like you can't get 6 people to agree on what kind of pizza to get, so to think that you could make a show that everybody's going to like is impossible. Like if you can't choose say pizza, so you just got to put something out, I think, that you find fascinating yourself and you and your team are proud of, and hope it connects with people who watch it.
Yeah. I was thinking about surf, like, again, I had never seen this comprehensive telling of Japanese surf culture, but I do have a pretty comprehensive or more comprehensive understanding of Australian surf culture,
Mm,
of American surf culture, of Brazilian surf culture now. And each, when a culture gets involved in the sport and they bring something to the sport, and you kind of see like, wow, Australia's junior system and all of that infrastructure does phenomenal for building world champs, and real athletes and competitors. And then you see Brazil get in, and you're like, man, the grit that Adriano de Souza had to come out of, or the grit that he developed from coming out of having little resource. This was his one way out, and wow, that made him super determined. And so, but then there's always a downside down the road, and like with American surf culture, it's like, man, all these kids have so much resource and access to opportunity from a young age. That really paves the way for them to go through juniors, for them to get on tour. But it turns out that it doesn't foster grit, and that once they're on tour, there's a difference between getting on tour and having that level of talent versus winning world titles. And so it'll be interesting to see Japan, the things that we've talked about that is unique to their culture, that really benefits them, will get them onto the world tour. But it'll be interesting to see what kind of the shortcomings are of that
yeah.
really intense parenting, you know?
Yeah. And you know, maybe the maybe the deeper stories of the story of athletics is that there are just certain people who, you know, are special and take all of it, and you know, like a canoa can use certain things, because I do think there could be more bad than good, you know, with that kind of pressure, and or you know, putting so much scrutiny on yourself that you're limiting your ability to be free and just perform, you know, and kind of find the joy in it. If it's always a job, I think especially with surfing, the performance can hinder, you know,
Yeah.
that there needs to be a bit of love in that. Gerlach's a great example of someone who's kind of tapped into that idea, the wave key of it all. And, you know, we'll see. It is to be, it's a story to be told. I do think we're going to be seeing a lot of talented people. You know, I think even just
I do too.
watching the Olympics and seeing the skateboarding and the snowboarding, you know, there's just this crew of kids who are explosive and exciting. And it'll be interesting. I feel I've been very lucky with my timing on projects, you know, and I do feel even this one, I'd love to say, oh, we knew it was happening and that's why we put our cameras there. But I just think the timing is going to
Yeah.
be really interesting and good for us.
Are there any, is there any Japanese surf film industry? Are there Japanese surf filmmakers?
So this was fascinating, especially because of the remote aspect, how difficult it was for me to access support, I guess I'll say. Jet Akira is an ex-pro surfer, and he had been shooting water stuff. And I kind of found him through our social media world, but he didn't have gear. We had to get water gear flown from Mike Prickett in Hawaii. And the cinematographer, a guy named Chris Nichols, who worked his butt off, plays around with surfing. He's a filmmaker, and we needed that to kind of drive the visual story of everything we shot in Japan. But even looking like, oh, can we find footage of Shino? Can we find footage of Hiroto in Japan? It doesn't exist right now. I think that's changing, but culturally, this is another interesting topic. They're very protective of their spots. The
Good.
spots are run by the deeper set of elders who don't like people photographing it, and I I respect that and I appreciate it. I think if they want to see their youth sort of hit that stratosphere we're talking about of pro surferness, there may need to be a little give and take of, you know, sharing footage from their home country. I think of it maybe a little like Hawaii. Maybe certain areas stay protective, certain areas end up a little more blown up. But yeah, I was amazed. You know, there were some interesting navigational hurdles on getting our cameras in certain spots. You know, and like so many places, it's kind of who you know and asking the right people permission, and really going through your P's and Q's. But because of that, there wasn't this wealth of footage for me to
Yeah.
pull from, which made it tricky.
Yeah. Well, the reason I ask is you opened the gateway for me to learn about some of these people, and it made me, I want to learn more, you know?
Yeah.
I was like, oh, well, there's probably Japanese surf films out there that I just don't know about that maybe I should go watch and learn about. But if they don't exist, I guess not.
It's pretty tough. I mean, maybe there's some underground ones, and I don't want to say there aren't and have people mad at me, but I certainly had trouble. I mean, I had trouble finding footage of Mar Ono. You know, he had shot some stuff
Crazy.
with Taylor Steele, and I reached out to Taylor, and you know, it's as this stuff we move on. It's like, oh, that's on some film can somewhere, and you know, I just thought like, oh, there's got to be a bunch of great stuff of him surfing river mouths, and you know, and it's hard to find that stuff, you know,
Yeah, I know
especially
they have,
now 4K.
I know they have a lot of industry. Like there is Japanese magazines,
Yeah,
obviously board builders, obviously neoprene manufacturers, that sort of stuff. But film, I haven't really seen because all my exposure has been through the lens of somebody, you know, American or
yeah,
an Australian.
yeah,
So
yeah. And maybe this project will inspire some young people there, you know. Probably
yeah,
one of the greatest joys I've gotten out of this run of making this stuff is I'll run into a kid who's 10, 15 years younger than me, and he'll say, I started getting into filmmaking because I love single fin yellow or
Yeah.
whatever. And that's truly happened on sets, on commercials. And it's, it's nice to know that, whether you're inspiring someone to grab a board and go out and catch a few waves, or grab a camera and tell a story, it makes you feel good at the end of the day.
Yeah. Total diversion, but what is Zio Baffa?
Ah, Zio Baffa is a wine project with my friends from Italy that came out of making Bella Vita. If you've
Okay.
seen Bella Vita, some of it was shot on a vineyard. That's the Castellani vineyard. And when we finished the film, the winemaker said, we need another project, because when guys get older, if they don't have a project, they just get together once a year and get drunk, and it's meaningless. But if you have a project, you keep doing something. So we're making 3 wines, and they're all bottled in Tuscany. The white wines is grown, the grapes are grown in Sicily on an organic farm. The red's grown there in Tuscany, and then the Prosecco's, of course, up from the north where Prosecco's from. And it's sustainably produced in a zero waste facility with recycled packaging, and really kind of a lot of attention to detail to be a forward organic wine, which was a little bit ahead of its time. The wine industry is coming around. There's a few more organic wines now, but it was really fun, and I'm a small part of it. The winemaker and the Italians do all the work, but it's called Zio Baffa wine. And on the East Coast, it's pretty readily available, and in Europe. And then we have it in select stores in California, or wine.com is a really easy way to get it if you want to try it. And it's not fancy. The idea is it's the wine you crack open with pizza, or, good old fashioned table wine.
Yeah, I saw it after Bella Vita, after I met you with Bella Vita, and I was almost certain that it was connected to that. And I think maybe Devin Howard shared a bottle with me at some point. And then I did see it in the market somewhere, maybe Seaside Market.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have it, right? And so I grabbed a couple bottles here and there whenever I would see it, just because I knew of the connection to you. And it's excellent.
Thank you.
It is very good. I've only ever had the red,
Yeah.
but I came from, I don't know, you and I have never discussed this, but I worked in the wine business,
Ah.
yeah, years and years ago, for like a decade out of college. And so I was very curious about the project, and I've always thought the wine, every vintage that I've had, has been like you said, an everyday drinker, but phenomenal for the price point.
Wow. Well, thank you for
Yeah,
the. We'll send this on to Pier Giorgio, because he does get the
perfect.
credit. But it was fun for me to kind of be a part of a project that's not a film. It truly
Yeah,
is something that although you're still at the mercy of Mother Nature, which keeps it interesting, exciting, and like you said, vintages change. But his family has been selling wine from Italy for over 120 years, I think, and so there's a deep history there. And for him, I think it's an exciting project because of the organic and the recycled packaging, to just do something a little forward thinking, where our footprint's a little lighter. And I do think, because of the organic, and it's a lower alcohol, lower sulfite, there's no added sulfites, that it's a little cleaner on the system.
yeah, it
There's
is.
members of my family who joke that they drink it and don't get a hangover, which I would never use as a marketing ploy, because, but I think it is a little easier on your system.
Yeah,
And it's fun. Well, I'll send you some. We'll
thank
figure
you.
that one out when this airs.
Absolutely. Um, what do you, so is there, presumably you're working on the next thing? Is there a next project in the works?
Yeah, it's always, my world's having a lot of balls in the air.
Yeah.
I had written the indie film that we were working to finance, so that one's still in the conversation. It's a scripted feature, nothing about surfing. It's actually an action adventure about a guy who gets trapped in an autonomous driving vehicle he helped design. So kind of a guy stuck in a box scenario. I have a TV series that's being looked at right now at one of the agencies that is truly my passion project. If there was one, what do you want to do next? And it's built to be fun and entertaining, and kind of the way Top Gun Maverick is just a good old fashioned movie. I wanted to do a series of that feeling, but also shared my love of the ocean. So it's about an ex Navy diver, and he leads a rogue team of treasure salvage hunters on missions. And like any good old action movie, he's brought in to help our government with some top secret thing that they can't handle on their own. And so it's just a lot of fun, and things blow up, and a lot of time on the water and in the water, which I would be really exciting to take on. I think logistically that's tough. Hollywood looks at it, and anytime you shoot on the water, it gets really expensive fast. So that's the uphill battle. But I feel as a surf community, most of the key stunt coordinators for Hollywood are some of our surf buddies from,
Yeah.
Oahu and whatnot. So I've had a few chats with friends, and I think we could figure out a way to do it right and make it fun. Because you had mentioned to me, I think when we were trading notes, what surfer would I love to work with next?
Yeah.
And my quick answer on that is Chris Hemsworth, because he'd be perfect in this series.
Man,
So
and he shreds.
And he rips, but it's not a surf series. It's about someone passionately connected to the ocean who may surf a little bit too. But
I mean, he's a legit surfer, and
yeah.
by the way, a phenomenal actor. Like, for being such a hunk, he doesn't need to be that talented.
Right.
He's actually really good. Like, he's like Brad Pitt in that way, It's like, damn, the guy's actually really good.
We were watching Limitless, the documentary series that's on Nat Geo. So we're part of the same family as of tomorrow. But my wife kept joking when he was being like, he'd do his interview, and she'd go, he's just, this is distracting. He's too good looking. Like, I'm not hearing what he's saying.
I know. And then on top of it, he rips.
And then he rips. Yeah. It's good. Yeah. Chris, if you're listening, we're fans. Hit me up. Let's go make something cool.
What's your current relationship like with surfing? How often do you get to surf nowadays?
So I have a 10-year-old son who's obsessed with surfing. So that's been kind of fun. I'm a bit of his Uber driver, and he often wants me to shoot footage of him, which is ridiculous. But he gets me in the water quite a bit. And, it's fun and interesting in this zone of Santa Barbara. There's a real shortboard culture. So when it's pumping, it's hard to get a wave. But there's a lot of days where it's not pumping, and I feel like I can find spots on my bigger boards and just get what I need. And I don't need much, That might have been a line in Shelter. I think Nat Young, it's in one of those movies, he says, as you get older, the neat thing is you need less waves. And that always stuck in my head, but there's some truth in it. I do like surfing with less people, which is harder and harder. But, I've got a very eclectic, just a bunch of weird boards I'm looking up because some of them are in the rafters, but single fins and gliders and, just fun kind of cruisy things. And then when the surf gets a little better, I have a few eggs. Josh Hall, the poor Josh made me the scotch that he did with Skip Fry, that I just got to take on a trip with those guys down to Scorpion Bay. And so, I'm guess I'm still obsessed with surfing. I'd like to do some media, not about surfing, but at the end of the day, I spend a lot of brain and passionate energy in getting into the water. But I think it makes me a better person. At least that's what my wife says.
It absolutely does. Yeah.
Go surf.
I'm curious, are there any surf filmmakers who you are excited to see whenever they produce something?
Wow, that's a good question. I'm sadly, I didn't spend a ton of time watching surf movies growing up. I watched, Hollywood movies. And then as I got more into it and through my Blue Torch days, obviously started paying more attention to it. But I can't really say yes or no to that. I definitely, I fall into the trap of being on Instagram and just in awe of all this free, amazing content that's beautifully shot, um, and just how much our little world's changed. And but if look, if Chris Malloy or or Keith or Dan said they had a new project, I would certainly go check that out.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
but yeah, I don't know. I'm for someone so into it. I think when I'm not into it, I'm totally focused in other things. So
Yeah.
it's a little
It's a
weird that way.
well, I mean, there's no one space to find them all anymore, you know?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
I'm on the board at the Florida Surf Film Festival. And so I thankfully get to see everything that comes through there. And I'm on the jury too, so I vote on them and stuff. But it's like some of them are phenomenal. And then
Yeah.
you never hear of them again, or they're never really advertised publicly. And I'll usually try to talk about them on the podcast to drive some attention to it, but that's basically it.
Mm,
You know, it's not like back in the day where the
yeah.
magazines would cover every single thing and then Surfline maybe would post every single thing. It's just everything's so diffused nowadays.
Yeah, I feel for people who want to do them, and I feel for the audience because I agree with you. Every now and then something will come across my desk. I'm thinking there's an Australian one about a big wave surfer. It's got a really cool image when
Fa-
you're looking.
Facing Monsters about Kirby
Yes,
Brown.
looks phenomenal. Where do I see that film? Is that
It's
I
not
don't
it's
know.
not available in America yet.
Yeah,
So maybe when it is, they'll advertise it again, and
yeah.
then it'll come across your transom at that point.
At that point,
Um, the cinematography specifically in that film
yeah.
is unreal.
Well, it's a really exciting time because when Mark and I shot film, it wasn't out of this pure snobbiness as much as I just didn't like how video looked, and so there was just a take on we're going to do this. I want it to look good, so let's put the effort in to shoot film. I think now that the digital's caught up and there's so many ways we can tell a story, and it looks insane. The high speed red stuff, it's gorgeous, so it's very exciting. um and yeah, it would be nice to figure out a way to streamline the pipeline. And I give credit to Ira Opera. I think the Surf
Yeah,
Network people watch my films that are up there because I get little Seinfeld checks, these little royalties, which thank you everyone for watching. But I love that I wish I had been that smart. Like, oh, I'm gonna get behind a space and just have it all there. But I don't have answers. It's I think the one thing that we hurt ourselves with as surfers is there's always going to be that little bit of the bro network. And when you buy a board, you want a discount, or when we used to, one friend would buy Surfer magazine and then he'd share it with all of us. And I think there's always a little bit of that, like we want it for free, maybe because the waves are free technically. And so the idea of paying into any of these things is hard for us. And because of that, it's hard on the other end to produce them.
yeah,
I feel honored, to have someone like Disney say, "Hey, run with it and tell some surf stories." That's pretty amazing, really, when I say it out loud. But it's not. That's not the way our world works normally.
I've I've almost reconciled it because I think the free passion projects sometimes are just better art, you know.
Yeah,
Um, and it is great to be able to have this Disney version because it's phenomenal as well. And like again, it's I've never had this story told to me before and this
yeah.
comprehensive of a version. So, but if you can kind of fund that sort of a thing and earn a living off of it, you still have time to do the passion project thing as well. I think that's the perfect balance.
Yeah, yeah, you hope. I mean, it's the one thing I learned in doing something like this at this scale and what comes with that. There's a corporate rigidity, I'll say.
Yeah.
Um, that is not totally fluid with surf culture, which is it is changing, and surfers are moving and they're tracking weather, and so to try to schedule that becomes hard. And I think that's why you don't see as many done the way we did chasing waves, because it's very difficult to do.
Yeah.
Where it's makes more sense to have a backpack and a camera and go out with a few friends, you know.
Yeah.
And the cool thing is the technology's caught up where you can do that and do a like we've said, super high end work.
Totally.
um, and maybe the miss is then the back end, kind of how you started this whole conversation with knowing how to get it out and letting people know about it. And um, you know, we'll get there. I think that the conduits are there, right, between
Yeah.
Instagram and all that. So it is an exciting time. I think it's just we're all getting blasted by so much content, that's the tricky part, you know. And
Totally.
how do you make enough noise that your vision stands out? And
Totally.
that's what creatives are up against right now.
Um, I don't know if you had time to formulate an answer to this question and inquiry, but you have unique insight into being an uncle of Connor Coffin. So my question for you is just, will we see Connor trying to requalify for the world tour?
Well, my cheesy answer is you should hit Connor up and you can have a good conversation about that. Because I don't think I'm in a place to answer for him. I think he's in a good place. You know, he's going through a lot of changes. He's going to get married next year, and I know there's some sponsorship changes he's been talking about.
Yeah.
And I think he, you know, I will say, because I think this is fair to bring up that a lot of people haven't discussed. He was that season that in I guess it was last season that brought in that midseason cut. At the time, he was working as the player rep, the surfer rep. So he was the go-between between the voice of the surfers and the WSL. There's always someone, and he had sort of been given that and was training under whoever had it before him. I forget. And it's a, you know, he, like Connor does, he takes everything very seriously and wanted to do a good job. But when you get into a scenario like that where a decision is made that a lot of people didn't like on the surfing end,
Yeah.
and they're voicing that, you're caught in the middle then of, you know, this very negative energy. And I think in retrospect for him, that was tough and probably took away from him being able to focus just on being a surfer and winning heats. And you know, again, I think he'd be a really interesting guy to get into and talk about that. And
Yeah.
maybe I've said too much already, but I think that's all fairly known. And I hadn't really thought about it until I talked to him that, you know, it there's a reason Kanoa Igarashi does well, because he is laser focused, you know. And I saw that firsthand working with him on Chasing Waves, to the point where it was even hard for us to get access. And I'm like, dude, we're doing this about Japan. Like, this is your thing. And it was, well, but, you know, I got Olympics and then I'm going to win a world title. And it was like the plan was set and nobody's getting in the way. And so when you take the other side of that, like, wow, I'm trying to help the players, and they were in this huge fight about this cut that nobody wants, and then that's a whole nother thing, you know. And it's an interesting lesson for anybody listening. You know, I think you got to really pick and choose your battles in this day and age on where you put your energy and your focus. And it's easy to get distracted, even if your intentions are the best.
Yeah.
Sometimes, and this comes up a little bit in Connor O'Leary's story in Chasing Waves, sometimes being a little selfish is needed if what you're trying to do inherently is selfish. Win something, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm trying to take this away from everybody else, you know. I know as a filmmaker, I don't bring that to the table. I want to be the best filmmaker, but I'm also not like doing it in that sense, you know. And maybe that's why some other people have this project and I don't. You know, I don't know. It's, I think at the end of the day, you got to wake up and chase your passions and just try to be smart about your decisions. So I'm excited
Yeah.
for Connor. I know I think they gave him the wild card. I just heard that recently. And so he can, if he wants to pursue the Challenger Series, do it. He's a little banged up. We were shooting in Hawaii and it's like a turf toe, but he hyperextended his toe. And so he's been kind of coming through that. And, you know, I know he likes being home too. It's pretty nice around here when it's not flooding.
Yeah,
But I think the world of both my nephews, and I love watching them surf. And I think the tour misses out not having him, but we'll see. We'll see
good.
where it ends up.
Those are good insights. I had not thought about that surfer's rep responsibility. I think in the past it might have been Adrian Buchan before
That
Connor.
sounds right. That sounds right.
And so it always had been like a guy who was on, year 12
Yeah.
of his
Yeah.
career on tour. So he had already put in a ton of hard yards and he was probably looking at retirement anyways. But that's the value of being the surfer's rep, is he has that much experience on tour. So it is almost an odd fit to have somebody like Connor, who is, fourth in the world at the time and
Yeah.
on the ascent, to take on that responsibility.
Yeah, I
But
mean, I know he was honored to be asked, because it's sort
yeah,
of,
of
hey,
course.
we trust you as our voice, right? And I think it's a testament of how many people liked him. But it's anytime you get in the middle of a fight, it's not easy on
Yeah,
anybody.
totally.
And that definitely, I think, was a tumultuous decision. And as a viewer, I don't know if it helped it. In a way, knowing that half the field had qualified took away some of the drama for me. I mean, I guess it became all about this race to the finish line. And but it's like, I we were just in Hawaii in early December, and I talked to some friends there. It's like, you kind of want to see pro surfing end at pipe. You kind of want to
Of
see people
course.
duking it out in the best waves in the world that scare the crap out of me. And it's just, it's something fun and meaningful. And that to me is a miss. So, if I ran the zoo, there'd be beer in every drinking fountain, but I don't. So let them
there'd be
figure it
Z
out.
there'd be
There's Zio
Zio
Baffa.
Baffa.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you. But
Baffa. I apologize for saying Baffa, Zio Baffa.
in Italy, it's Baffa. In California, it's Baffa. Six
Gotcha.
half dozen. I've been called worse across the board.
Yeah.
But
Well, final question for everybody interviewed is just, what was the last surfboard you rode, or what boards are you riding currently?
the last surfboard
Or
I rode was the beginning of this swell, and it's a Tyler Hatzikian. He calls it a baby gun, so it's a single fin, but it's a very pulled in kind of. I think I'm riding a 9. He actually made it for me when I went to Bali, and it's a fun kind of, gets you in early, but can handle a little hollow, face. And my son and I were surfing one of the points that doesn't get as many people as Rincon at low tide, and some pretty fun waves. Actually, it was Christmas Day, and we kind of got it alone. So, you know, it still happens.
yeah. How do you get a board from Tyler Hatzikian?
Well, Instagram is a good start. Just DM him. Yeah, I'm thankfully, for all my years of doing film projects with Tyler, looking at a few beautiful boards he's made me, but he's more interested in racing his cars these days, I think. But he is making boards, and I think Instagram, and there's a website. I think Tyler Surfboards.
I'm just saying, isn't there a wait list? Can I even get one if I wanted one?
I will. I don't have such answers.
Um, well, I did like seeing a couple of clips of him in Chasing Waves too.
Yeah, I snuck in a few of the old crew, didn't I? There's
Good
always
for you.
part of that too. Is like, well, my footage I know I own and have it here, so we don't have to go through any licensing. But yeah, there's a little bit of nepotism. I think Connor and Parker have little cameos here or there, and yeah, I tried to represent a few friends, and it's what we do.
Yeah, no, and it was well done, and they earned the spot, and it was relevant to the conversation that
Well,
was
good.
taking place. So it
Thank you.
wasn't forced.
Try to keep it.
Yeah.
That was a lot of my role. On this team, there were very few people who surfed, so it was interesting. I had to do a lot of shouldering that sort of surf. Whoa, you can't put that there, and
Yeah.
with 6 hours, I'm still not sure I got everything, but it's funny. I think you're the first person who's seen this thing outside of my little world of production people. So it would be very awkward if this conversation started with, wow, you just really didn't
Blew it.
deliver.
I never, yeah, I don't appreciate. Yeah. Well, Disney didn't make it easy for me to jump through the screener process. Let me tell you that. But I finally navigated my way through it.
There's a lot of protocols in that world, but it'll be
Totally.
early. It'll be easy now. As soon as January 11th passes, on the Disney Plus app, all episodes, dig in and learn a bit about Japan.
Sweet. We'll direct everybody to all of your stuff in post-production as well.
Thank you.
Gladly. Jason, great to reconnect after 8 years. Let's do it again more frequently.
Yeah, David, it's really good to see you, and congrats again on keeping this going and keeping surf stories out there. You know, it's a beautiful thing, and thank you for the time. Thank you everyone for listening and watching the projects through the years. I appreciate it.
Right on. Thanks.